All right, what's going on, everybody? So, welcome to the second episode of the Sprint Review. So, this is a show that I just started doing a couple weeks ago. Doing it live every first and third Thursdays of the month. So I call it let's see if I get this right, the Sprint Review. And this is basically here to talk about personal finance topics that are important to young tech professionals, right? And so a little bit about me. So my name is Mike Zung. I am a certified financial planner and founder of Java Wealth Planning. This is going to be a little distracting seeing the comments come in. So I'm glad that I'm somebody's hero at least. So yeah. So what I do is I run a fee-only firm that is geared to serve tech professionals. So I'm based in Kansas City, but I serve clients all over the U.S. And then I was also in software development. So that's kind of part of the reason for focusing on the tech professionals, right? So thanks for joining. And so today, what we are going to be talking about is, should I buy a house now? And so is now the right time to buy a house? And if so, how much house can you afford, right? So it's a real big topic. There's a lot of people that are thinking about buying a house, and so I figured, let's discuss this. And another thing that's brand new, this is the first time that I'm ever doing this, so have this umbrella of grace for me, is that I'm bringing in a guest. And so for a guest, I'm bringing in Keith Spencer. So Keith Spencer is a financial planner, and Keith and I met is about a year ago. So we are both members of the XY Planning Network, and we are in the same study group or mastermind group. I think mastermind sounds a little bit cooler. But anyway, Keith is he's really detail oriented, smart dude. He's also a musician with his church. And then he's just all around just a real solid guy. So without further ado, let me switch to here and welcome Keith.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Yep. So Keith, I guess just give us a quick intro. So where are you located and a little bit of your story.
Great. Yeah. So my name's Keith Spencer. I've been in the investment industry for about 20 years. I'll hit 20 years a couple months from now, which is kind of cool. So I was down in Los Angeles, California for the first majority of my life, and worked at an investment management firm down there for about 18 years. About a year and a half ago, I moved up to where I'm at now, which is Spokane, Washington. That was done for family reasons. My wife is originally from this area, and we like the idea of our kids being near their grandparents and aunts and uncles who all still live here. So we came up here, and with the move, I decided to launch my own financial planning firm. So that's called Spencer Financial Planning. And so I've been in business with that firm for a little less than a year. I mostly work with people in Washington and in California, which is good for today's topic, because there are hot real estate markets in both places and in certain pockets of both places. So certainly some of my clients are dealing with these issues right now that we'll be talking about.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. It definitely seems like there's this influx of everyone saying, "Hey, maybe I should buy a house. I want to buy a house," right? And so I figured it's a very good, it's topical. It's for the timing of us doing this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So before I go any further, I got to do the important disclaimer. So first, this video is all general explanations and education, and we are not going to be giving any specific tax, legal, or investment advice. And so before considering acting on any of this stuff, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor. And if you don't have one, then you could reach out to me, you could reach out to Keith, or ping us and we can give you resources for other places that you could also look. So have to have that disclaimer because I don't know what Keith is actually going to say, so I can't vouch for his opinions.
Yeah, I don't know either, so we'll see.
Right. Okay. All right, cool. So just kind of starting out, what I figured that we would first talk through is just what is going on right now in the housing market, right? So I pulled a couple of stats that I thought were pretty indicative of what's going on right now. So this first one is actually something I got from the, I guess it's from the California Association of Realtors that talks about how long houses are actually staying on the market right now. And so since they started tracking it in 1990, the time on the market, the median time on the market is just 8 days now, right? So that means, and so with the median, that means that exactly half of the houses in California are staying on the market less than 8 days. So and there's so many anecdotal stories of people trying to buy a house and having, getting in the bidding wars and, things having to pay over asking price and everything. And this is just one of those things of just like how quickly people are having to act, right? So, so that's one of the stats that really kind of blew my mind. And then the other one is talking about what the median price of a house is. So first, I was going to try to stump Keith or quiz him on what the median household price is, but he apparently looked that up beforehand too. So I guess Keith, from what you got, what is the median household price?
What I saw was that the median household price, U.S. wide, so nationwide, right, is about $319,000 right now. Yep. So that's what I saw. So obviously much higher in some states than others, but nationwide, that's I think where we're at, right around there.
Right. Yeah. The Californians are probably thinking it's like, oh yeah, 313. Right? Like,
yeah, that would be nice.
Right.
Yes.
But then the other stat that you said you didn't look up, so that I'm going to quiz you on is how much it's increased since last year.
Since last year, nationwide?
Yeah.
Again,
so the
U.S. wide?
Average, if it's actually the number that I had is now it's 334, right?
Okay.
And so how much has that increased since last year?
Since last year, I would say, gosh, last year that was we're just dealing with the beginning of the COVID stuff. And so probably market was way down. Well, actually, yeah, probably market wasn't too down because real estate prices don't move that quickly. So I'm going to say up 15%.
Oh, that's pretty close. So it was 18.4%. So
okay.
It's gone up almost 20% in a year, right?
Yeah.
That's the nationwide average housing price, right? So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So I guess so first is just to kind of think through, okay, why is the housing market the way that it is right now? So I have a few bullet points, but first I figure I'd turn it over to you to see so from your perspective, what's causing the housing prices to go as high as they are and to go as quickly as they are?
Yeah, I think it's a variety of stuff. I think some of the big things, I think there's a demographic aspect to this, in that the millennials are the biggest demographic generation in the United States right now. And they passed the baby boomers a few years back. And so I think what's happened is a lot of millennials took longer to purchase a house than previous generations had. So previous generations had, like, say, coming out of college or just getting going with life, getting married or whatever, they would buy a house. That was just kind of what you did for a very long time. And that, I think that trend changed a little bit with the millennial generation. But what's happened now is from what I've read is that millennials are starting to buy. So they are starting to get into the market, maybe, getting a little older or
Right.
settling down or whatever it is. And so now you have the biggest generation, the biggest demographic generation coming in large numbers into the housing market, which, basic supply and demand, that's
Right.
creating a lot more demand.
Right.
So I think that's a big thing. And another thing that's driving demand is institutional buying too.
Mm-hmm.
And by institutional buying, I mean more investors. And so that could be, mom and pop investors, flipping houses, that kind of thing, but also, big money too, money managers and that kind of thing. I think there's some of that going on as well.
Right.
So I think that those are two of the big ones that come to mind anyway.
Yeah. Actually, I hadn't really thought about that from the millennial perspective of, it's just like the trend, and maybe I'm just speaking completely anecdotal, but that the trend was that it's like they're not necessarily in a rush to get married, start a family, get the house, have the 2.5 kids, right? That it's that it's more working on your career, being okay with renting longer, right? But then kind of getting to that place where it's like, okay, now we are ready to kind of put down roots a little bit more, and so going out and trying to buy their house.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So a few of the things, and then so another thing, I guess maybe I'll pose this to you as well. I'm just going to sit back and I'm just going to like lob questions at you instead the whole time. So,
okay.
I guess how much do you think that the pandemic has exacerbated this problem?
That's so hard to say. I mean, obviously people have been staying home more. And so there is more of a premium, I guess, that's been placed on one's experience at home.
Yeah.
So I think, that could be a factor too. My suspicion is that if the pandemic didn't hit, we would still be seeing similar sorts of trends.
Okay.
From a big picture perspective, I think maybe the pandemic accelerated some of that.
Yeah.
So I think probably that we've seen some of that. Yeah, That would be my take.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And some of the stuff that I've seen is, and again, a lot of this is anecdotal. So we're financial planners, we're not real estate agents or mortgage brokers or anything like that. So our sample size is probably a lot smaller than some others. But that just kind of with the shift in a lot more working from home, people spending a whole lot more time at home and feeling like, okay, we need more space, right? So there's that drive of like, we'd like to have more space. Again, what you were saying, having more of a value, a higher value on your experience at home, right? And then also just especially in the tech sector, that there's a lot more of companies that are going remote, right? So that it's just like, okay, you don't have to commute into the office anymore. And then there's a lot more freedom as far as where you live. And so people are looking to move into different areas and then, possibly still work for the same company or get another job working for another company that is 100% remote. So there's that geographic freedom that you have. And so it's like people, I feel like it's people thinking through those things of just like, hey, kind of the world or the US especially has opened up to us. And so let's go find a place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've wondered, I don't have great insight into this, I'm sure others do, but I've wondered with that dynamic that you're talking about, what will that mean for some of the hotter real estate markets that have been historically more driven by jobs? Like say San Francisco, Bay Area kind of area, for example. That's where so many of the tech companies are based, and so there's a lot of workers there. And so for somebody who lives in San Francisco, with that dynamic you're talking about, maybe there's more of an opportunity for that person to move to some other state, or if they're going to be telecommuting anyway from home. So I think that might be a driving force in the coming years and decades even.
Right.
But on the other hand, the Bay Area is a great place to live anyway, besides jobs.
Right.
So you got that going on too. So.
Right. Yeah. Because one of the things of, if that's the only logic, then you would think that the Bay Area would be one that the home prices would actually be staying level or possibly going down. Like, hey, if this idea is that everyone's leaving, the Silicon Valley or the Bay, right, that would go down, but that is by far not what is going on right now.
Yeah.
And actually, so there's a comment that came in that talks about lumber prices, right? So I got Trevor and Alicia here. So it said, did we mention lumber prices, right? And so that's one. It gets to I guess the more basic level of why home prices would be going up. Right, it's the basics of supply and demand, right? The demand is super high because of all these things that we're talking about, right? But then the supply is either people willing to sell their house or new builds, right? And with the new builds, that like the price to build a new house now is so much higher because lumber has just kind of gone crazy, right? So yeah, I mean that can definitely play into it as well, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, just the cost of building right now is higher because of lumber, like you said. Also, this is anecdotal, but here in Spokane, where I'm at, where the housing market is also very, very strong, contractors or house builders are. A contractor is tough to find right now. An available contractor, that I should say, is tough to find right now. There's just so much demand for their services that it's therefore they could probably charge more to do things and that kind of thing, which drives prices as well. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Okay. So then I guess really kind of going on to the next part of of this idea of, okay, this is what's going on with the market, right? Like houses are a lot higher, and it's a lot tougher to get a house right now. Just again, anecdotally, I'm hearing so many stories of people that it's like, hey, I put in a bid, but then there's 20 other people that are bidding on this house, and they're bidding way over asking price, and they are also waiving all of their, all of the home inspections and any other contingencies, right? So, so I guess maybe the next question is like, is this a bubble? Does this feel like 2008, to where like this is a bubble and we should just wait it out? So, and I guess again, back to the disclaimer and all that stuff, like, I think the quick version is that we're, we don't know, right? But like you and I aren't able to fully predict what is actually going to happen with housing, with home prices, right? But I guess from your perspective, like, does it feel different? Do you think that it's a lot of the same things?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'm going to approach it from the perspective of, and I apologize if I'm jumping ahead a bit topically, but I think it has to do with whether the larger question of whether now is the right time to buy, right? And so I think the way I approach that is a couple different layers, even prior to getting to the question. So the first layer is, number one, I see owning real estate as an inherently good thing. From a investment perspective, a life perspective, I think it's inherently a good thing. It's not the only path to, building financial health and wealth and all that, and happiness. It's certainly not the only path, but it is a very viable, historically sound path, I would say. So I see it as an inherently good thing. That's kind of part one, and that's because, it gives you diversification from your other kind of, holdings, whether that's investments or cash or whatever it is. It also gives you an inflation protection.
Yeah.
Real estate tends to go up with inflation over time, but it also gives you enjoyment. There's something great about owning a house, about being able to, with your stocks and bonds, you can't, it's not nearly as close to home,
right.
Pardon the pun, but with your home, you touch the walls, you feel the carpet. It's a very personal decision as well. So anyway, I see it as a good thing to own. Second part is I don't feel like I can time the markets, and you just said it well, Mike. So is the market high right now? Have prices gone up? Yeah, absolutely, they have.
Yeah.
Does that mean they therefore won't continue to go up? No, it doesn't mean that necessarily. Right. Does it therefore mean that a crash is about to come? No, it doesn't mean that. I just don't know in the end. And so because I can't predict that, my starting place there is to say, okay, it's inherently a good thing. I don't feel like I can accurately predict where it's going. And then the last piece to that in my mind is, and this gets more to your specific question, I think now, is it does feel similar to 2007, 8, 9, kind of that time period, or I guess just prior to that,
right? Because
housing prices have been going crazy, and there's been a mania. I'm not sure if mania is the right word, but just a real push to oh my gosh, am I going to get priced out of the housing market? I need to buy now, throwing more and more dollars at things, taking contingencies out of offers, all those different factors. That feels similar to me. But I do think that if you look below the surface, a lot of the underlying data and statistics and such, they actually are very different compared to a decade ago. So that gives me some hope. Just a couple examples. Average credit scores are way, way higher now in terms of for people who are taking out mortgages, way higher. Back then, it was very focused on people who really shouldn't have been buying houses in the first place because their credit scores were too low. So there's these things called ninja loans. I don't know, people might remember those, but it stood for, so it's acronym, it stood for no income, no job or assets, ninja. And these were just loans that were given out that you want to borrow, $200,000 from us, $500,000 from us. You don't have a job, you don't have income, you don't have assets. That's okay. Here's a bunch of money. So we're not seeing anything like that this time around. Average credit scores for mortgages are way, way higher. So that's a good thing. The U.S. consumer generally is just much more for the house buying cohort or people who are buying houses. The balance sheet of the U.S. consumer is much better than before as well. Much less debt, higher reserves, cash reserves, higher assets, that kind of thing, which is related to the credit score thing that I mentioned before too. So yeah, it does feel very different to me, or it feels similar, but I think it is actually very different.
Right. Yeah. I think. Yeah, you touched on all my bullet points. That was perfect. So yeah, So I agree as far as just the general feel of it is that it's a lot more driven just by, again, that classic supply and demand of the supply is just real small and demand is really high. But what in 2007, 2008, it was a lot more of just the real loose lending practices where people that basically financially people that had no real business getting into houses were not allowed. I don't want to make it sound like snotty or anything, but that they were able to do this whenever it's just it just didn't make sense, right? But now at least from a lending perspective, they've learned their lesson to where it's okay, we're still we're underwriting again, right? There's not these ninja loans. I mean, that's fascinating. And then so then and I guess one thing I was going to ask that you kind of touched on there is just talking about the like viewing your home as an investment or not. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm very similar as far as like, it's not an investment first, right? First, it's this is where you are raising your family, right? This is where you're laying your head to rest, right? So, I mean, it's not an investment from a strictly financial perspective, the way that like a rental real estate would be. And so I think the decision is a lot more around that kind of, not to get too I don't know, fuzzy about it, but that it's just like, it's an investment in your happiness, in your lifestyle, right? In what it is that makes you, what it is that makes you happy, right? So,
I think I probably lean more towards, so I agree with what you said, though I probably do put a little more weight on it being an investment as well. And so I don't disagree with what you said, because I think it is personal first and foremost. But I do feel like if you take a step back and you think about your house exposure or real estate exposure, it should be thought of in conjunction with your other assets. So, if you think about your retirement plans plus your bank accounts, et cetera, if you have a rental property as well, I feel like they all should be looked at together, with the idea that ideally, at least, you want some balance between the three main pillars. And what I think of that, it would be real estate, equities, which is another word for stocks.
Right.
So the stock market, mutual funds that invest in stocks, and then interest earning assets, which would be bonds, the bond market, but then also cash and bank accounts, et cetera. So real estate, equities, and interest earning, kind of having a healthy balance between those so that you're not overly weighted in any one, I think is good from a financial health. And so including one's home in that, to me, makes sense and should be seen as a metric to be looked at from a purely financial perspective, even though, you and I have both made the same point that it's more than just an investment. It's, there's a personal element to it as well.
Right. Yeah. Can't cozy up to your mutual funds.
No.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's see. Actually, so there's a couple questions out here that I want to put up here. So one is saying, are there 7-year ARM loans out there that are expecting to default again, or did we learn our lesson? Right. So the first thing that I think of is that actually ARM loans aren't very popular right now. Just as much as anything because the fixed rate interest is already pretty low, right? So usually you get an ARM loan to try to lower your interest rate, for right now. But then a 15-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage is still, I mean, it's creeping up a little bit now, it seems, but it's still low threes, right? So there's not as much reason to get an ARM that has the possibility of going up, after 7 years, 5 years, whatever the ARM is, and just lock in and be like, hey, for 15, 30 years, this is what my interest rate's going to be. So,
yeah, that's well said. I would only add that it's not so, when it comes to ARMs, it's not so much the loans themselves that are dangerous or not dangerous. What's dangerous is either a default scenario where the underlying borrower, i.e. you, the borrower, can't handle the payments anymore. So whether that's job loss or whatever on the borrower side, or the other side of it would be interest rates. So if after the 7 years in a 7-year ARM, the interest rate then starts to reset and potentially will be going up if interest rates are going up generally. Could go down too, but we don't know, the direction of interest rates longer term, probably higher than now. But, again, it's so hard to time the market and figure that out. But I guess a counterbalance to that would be, even if interest rates are going up, that probably means inflation is going up as well.
Right.
In which case, the underlying real estate that you owned is probably going up as well, because real estate tends to do well in higher inflation situations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not 100% one-for-one relationship, but that does maybe soften the blow a bit if interest rates do go up.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So that's the better way of, whenever some people use the term of just like it's a hedge against inflation. So it's like that's what we're talking about, right?
That's what we're talking about. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Trying to break down the jargon walls.
Right. Yeah. But certainly with my clients, when we've talked about this, I've always very heavily leaned towards fixed rate loans instead of, my thought is don't get an ARM unless your plan is to move anyway in the next 5 years or whatever, in which case, go for it. But then there's a fine line there too, because if you're going to move too soon, then you shouldn't be buying a house in the first place anyway, right? So if you're going to be moving in a year or 2 years, then it probably doesn't make sense to buy a house at this point, because as everybody knows, I'm sure, when you buy a house, there's a lot of transaction costs to that. And then when you sell that same house, there's a lot of transaction costs there too. So to buy and sell within a short period of time is a very expensive thing to do, and really only makes sense if the price of the house goes way up, either because you're flipping it, because you're putting a lot of money into it, or you get lucky because the housing market just takes off during that year or whatever.
Right. Yep. Yeah. That's great. So yeah, I guess, and then the other one that I was wanting to touch on, and that you did touch on a little bit, is this idea of like this. There feels like there's this FOMO going on, right? So this fear of missing out, of housing prices are going up really fast. I need to buy now, because otherwise I'm not going to afford to live in my town, right? And that's like I'm hearing that from a lot of people. So I have a brother that lives in Austin, Texas, right? And so that's one where it's just like, oh man, like Austin is one where the housing market's crazy. Then I'm working with some clients that are in Reno, Nevada, right? And so there's a lot of people from California that are moving because Reno is just on the other side of the border from like the Nevada-California border, and so it's like that they feel like they might get priced out of the market there, right? So I guess for people in that scenario, I guess what's your feeling as far as kind of some I'm stopping short of saying advice, but what's some things to think about for people in that scenario?
Yeah, that's a tough one. First of all, I would say, just from a purely human perspective, not thinking about finances necessarily, I totally get it. That can be like, we call it FOMO kind of, jokingly, but it's real, right? Like the F in that is fear, and it's real. So yeah, that's my first thought, that I totally get it. I guess where I land, and now this is going less away from the human side of things, more to the numbers and the finances, but I feel like it depends. Thank you very much, Keith. It depends. But it really does depend on your situation. And what I mean by that is, like, when you're thinking about buying a home, there's different rules of thumb that we could maybe get into later if you want to, Mike. But there's different rules of thumb you can look at. But really what it boils down to, I think, is your ability, or a person's ability, to be able to handle the costs of owning a house. Because if the costs are too great, then that is going to not going to, but there's a likelihood or a high probability or whatever that it's going to sabotage the rest of your financial health. Right. And that's what we want to avoid. So with this kind of like FOMO idea, the danger is you just end up taking on too much house with too high of a mortgage, and the ongoing costs are either you can't keep up with them, which is bad, obviously, or maybe you can keep up, but your it's just sabotaging you can't save enough for retirement. You
Right.
can't save up for your kids' college plans or whatever it is. So got to be careful of that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So actually, I mean, let's go ahead and kind of go into that part of it. The second question of so I feel like as well as we can right now in 37 minutes, answer the question is like, should you buy a house now, right? And so kind of talking about just the way that the market is, ways to think about it from that perspective. But then if the answer for you is like, yeah, I still want to pursue buying a house, right? So in that scenario, then kind of thinking of there's some general rules of thumb, right? Of how much house can you afford, right? So a couple of the kind of more popular ones that you'll hear is trying to keep it below 28% of your gross income. So that's gross before any taxes and all that stuff. It's not take home, right? Or there's if we get to a more conservative side, there's kind of that Dave Ramsey camp, right? That he says 25% of your net, like of your take home pay, and on a 15-year mortgage, right? Mm-hmm. So that kind of thing, that squeezes it a lot, right? So yeah, those are two of the main ones that I'm really familiar with. I know we were talking a little bit before this, and there were a handful of other ones that you've heard and have learned as well. So you want to talk through some of those?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe one clarification on the 28%. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that 28%, like when it's housing prices or housing costs, really it's referring to what's known as PT or PITI. I'm not sure how you say it, but it's PITI, which is principal and interest, which are really your mortgage payment, and then plus taxes. And by that means property taxes plus home insurance as well. Yep. So with a lot of mortgages, you're paying all of those together anyway, and the property taxes and the interest or the insurance go into an escrow account, and so it's all together. Right. But other companies, you can just do the PI part, and then you pay your own taxes and insurance. But when it comes to that metric of 28%, it's those four things put together.
Okay. Yeah.
So. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, and actually, I guess, and another thing to kind of touch on is like, yeah, what else are considered housing costs? I don't want to try to derail too much from this part, but that it's just like whenever you buy a house, a lot of people are thinking of just kind of like, can I make these mortgage payments, right? But then there's the other things to think about with buying a house of, HOA dues, right? So if there's a homeowners association that's with it. And then, so you said the property taxes and insurance, but then just maintenance costs, right? So that's one thing that I talk to all my renter clients, where it's just like, if you want to rent right now, that's fine. 'Cause like there's value in renting, because whenever, the furnace breaks, then you're calling somebody and say like, hey, the furnace broke, come fix it, right? But whenever you're owning the house, then it's like, that's you, right? And then I guess, I don't know if there's any other expenses that you ever think of to kind of put into their utilities, possibly. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I was just going to say utilities, if those are taken care of by the landlord right now. Right. Maybe just as a helpful rule of thumb for the maintenance costs part of it, there's a industry rule of thumb out there that says you should plan on spending about 1% of the home value per year on maintenance costs. Okay. So that is, it's a rule of thumb. It's going to be very different for each person. So, say it's say it's a $500,000 house, that means you're doing $5,000 per year in maintenance costs. And I guess two thoughts about that would be that, number one, it's going to be super lumpy. One year you'll have $200, and then the next year you got a $10,000 fix you got to do.
Right.
And then also that's very variable as well. For a newer home, it's probably going to be less than that.
Right.
For an older home,
Right.
it's probably going to be about that, maybe a little more.
Right.
Maybe you'll just get lucky. Maybe you'll get very unlucky. So obviously it's going to change, but you got to start somewhere. And that's a helpful rule of thumb, I think, that 1% rule of thumb.
Yeah, I like that. I've never heard that before. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, what other kind of metrics to use to whenever you're thinking of like, okay, how much, like, what is my budget for how much house I can afford?
Yeah. And one other thing popped in my mind for the last piece, and that would be potentially higher commuting costs. So that, may or may not apply to you, but if somebody is renting in an area and now wants to buy a home, there's a decent chance that that person is going to have to move away a little further in order to afford a home.
Right.
Go out, instead of living in the city, go to the suburbs, for example.
Right.
Which, if you're going into the office, if you're not telecommuting, then that's going to add commuting costs. That's probably not a huge deal, but think about it anyway.
Right.
So then just rules of thumb and how to think how much to buy, how much can. There's different rules of thumb out there. There's one that I like to use, and that is to say, so it's based on your income, first of all, and it is a rule of thumb. So that let's take that disclaimer and put it out there right now.
I'll draw a big asterisk here. Like, all of these are rules of thumb.
Perfect. Yes. So that would be, if take your gross income, household gross income, and really you ought to be aiming for a house purchase of, in most areas of the country, of 2 to 3.5 times your gross income.
Right. So
if you make $100,000, you ought to be aiming for $200,000 to $350,000 house price range.
Yep.
So the first reaction to that, or one of the first reactions to that, is if you live in another area of the country, you might think, oh my gosh, that's not going to buy anything in my, in my city or whatever. Right. So there is so that's the kind of starting place rule of thumb. But then for higher cost areas, you could bring that up to 4 to 5 times your gross income. Right. So $100,000, you could go up to, say, $400,000 to $500,000, which may or may not buy a decent place in your area. The reason that's a bit of a it's interesting. In some ways, it's a limiter to make sure that you don't go too high. Right. On the other hand, it kind of acts as a minimum too, in that for one of my clients that I'm working with right now, actually, they are looking at, they aren't sure how much home they want to buy, but according to that rule of thumb that I just shared, they could feel very comfortable buying, up to the minimum, which is actually higher than what they were thinking. Right. And so it kind of gives you a good range to think about. Yeah. So I guess the follow on to that then is, and this is where the asterisk comes in, is it really depends on your cash flow situation. Yeah. I just shared a rule of thumb, but if for example, if somebody lives a very expensive lifestyle otherwise, then going up to 4 to 5 times your income in housing, that's going to be really tough. Right. On the other hand, if you live a very kind of low expense lifestyle, you're super interested in the FIRE movement, for example, something along those lines, then yeah, maybe you could probably afford a bit more potentially. So it comes down to your cash flow, and that goes back to, okay, how much does it cost, with all these different expenses, and really thinking about how does that then turn into a month to month or year to year reality for you, right, given your income and given the rest of your expenses beyond the housing expenses. Right. Yeah, those are all really good points. So let's see. So then I guess really maybe just trying to put a bow on it a little bit.
So it sounds like.
And I do have one other thought, maybe
Hey.
before you put too much of a bow.
Yeah,
So,
no. We'll leave it untied. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Okay. The next question to me would be, okay, say you have an idea of how much you want to buy, go by these rules of thumb, or you do a detailed cash analysis, cash flow analysis, whatever it is. Then let's say you want to do whatever, $500,000 home, $1 million home, whatever it is for you.
Yep.
Then the next question is, how much should you put down as a down payment?
Yep.
So that is, it's much easier for somebody who currently owns a home, because assuming that you're able to sell your current home, and then you can put the proceeds from that towards the new home. Maybe there's some timing issues there, but that makes things a lot easier, obviously.
Right.
But let's assume that somebody doesn't own a home, looking to buy their first home right now, then it's, I think, what the sweet spot when it comes to how much mortgage to take out, or the other side of it would be how much down payment to put down, would be you really want your mortgage, ideally, just from an optimal perspective, to be 50 to 80% of the home's value. That would be the kind of optimal range in my mind. Doesn't mean it can't be higher or lower, obviously, but that's a good range. So what that means is, ideally, you want to get at least a 20% down payment.
Right.
And depending on the value of the home, that either might be fairly straightforward, or that might be really tough. You know, $1 million home, you're looking at $200,000 cash that you got to come up with. So that's difficult, but it's something to look at. What happens is, if you go below 20% for your down payment, so now your mortgage is greater than 80% of the home value, then you're probably going to be stuck paying PMI. PMI stands for private mortgage insurance. And for most borrowers out there, it's kind of like a surcharge. It's like the mortgage company is taking out insurance. I mean, that's what it is. They're taking out insurance on the possibility that you might default on the loan, basically. And you, as the borrower, have the benefit or the luxury of paying that insurance premium. And that's in the form of this thing called PMI. And so it just adds to your housing costs. That can be removed at some point if over time, if the loan value goes down as you pay it off. But that's something to consider for cash flow. There are loans out there or types of borrowers that can avoid PMI. So I think military comes to mind, VA loans. I think there's some in the medical community that you could get where you don't have to pay PMI. So there's options out there for a lot of people. But if that doesn't mean you, then kind of that's something to consider. The other side of that, and sorry, Mike, did you want to say anything about that before I go on? Okay.
No. That's all good.
Okay. So the other side of that in my mind is think about the after as well. Once you pay pay that down payment, what do you have left in cash?
Right.
How exposed does that make you?
Right.
So that then gets to just not even thinking about homes or whatever, but just thinking about basic financial principles and that kind of thing. This idea of an emergency fund. Right. So again, there's different rules of thumb out there for how big your emergency fund would be. A popular one would be 6 months worth of expenses.
Right.
Or if you're a dual income, maybe 3 months worth. Those are popular rules of thumb. I might lean more, but think about, like, after you put down a down payment, then what are you left with? Is it way below what a good emergency fund should be? And if that's the case, then that puts you at a high risk exposure.
Right.
So it's a balancing act of how much cash to put down without getting PMI, but still having enough cash left over to save you from emergencies if you were to lose your job or something else comes up.
Right. Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what you were saying towards the beginning of, your house is part of your overall net worth and portfolio, right? And so if you stretch too much for this house, then you're overweight in your real estate, in your primary residence real estate, and you've depleted the cash, right? And so,
Yeah.
and then it's also just inviting the troubles of, okay, now you own this house, and like I was saying, whenever the heater breaks, whenever the furnace breaks, then you're on the hook for it. And if you've just depleted all of your cash to where like I can't pay for that, right? So it's yeah. So I mean, I think that's a really great point as far as just looking at your entire picture, right? Of does it fit overall, not just like, can I make this work, right?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, being honest with yourself too about, something that I try to do in my own life and my own finances, and then with my clients too, just think about, okay, it's more than just kind of this theoretical concept of an emergency fund. Like really think through what if, and what I call it a triple whammy. So what if a triple whammy hits, at the same time, you lose your job. That's whammy number one. Yep. And that's a reference to an old game show
that was on TV. Pressure.
I think
it's back.
I heard about that. That's right. Yeah. So no whammy. So that's you lose your job at the same time as whatever you got to replace the roof, and at the same time you have a big health scare, right. And so you have to put a bunch of money towards that, while at the same time the stock market is going down. Let's say all that stuff you had triple whammy on top of the stock market downturn. Right. And so that's scary times. And so you want to have a good cash position and not have to sell your stocks. Ideally, if you do have stocks, you don't want to have to sell those because the market's way, way down in this scenario. So having enough cash available to survive that potential triple whammy, and especially with job loss, you don't know how long it's going to be too. So,
right.
Don't skimp. I think my main point is don't skimp too much on the emergency fund amount.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like, it gets into like how much risk you're willing to take, right? But then that gets super dangerous in this. It's one thing taking a risk in, hey, I have an aggressive portfolio of, like I'm heavy in stocks, right? That's one thing. But taking that risk literally close to home, right? I mean, like that can have some pretty major, there's major fallout that comes from that. It's like you will feel that. It's not just, hey, my account balance went from, 200,000 to 150,000, and that stinks. Like it's like, hey, I don't have cash right now, like, and I have all these problems, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
Those are all really good points. So yeah, to try, yeah. So can I tie it now?
Yes, you can. Okay. Please do.
All right. So yeah. So just to the overall picture of like, okay, should you buy a house now, and how much can you afford, right? So it's it's just thinking of, okay, should you buy it now from a market perspective? It's like, sure, it seems like it's not the best time because the housing market is what it is, and these stats that we're showing, and it's super competitive. There was actually a comment from someone on here that said I've been waiting for the real estate to crash for 4 years, right? And so it's just like, yeah, 4 years ago we thought that the housing market was pretty hot then too, and it's just like, maybe we'll wait it out, right? So from that perspective, I think it's first recognizing that we don't know when that's going to happen, right? Or if, right? So because since we're saying this doesn't feel like 2008, there's somewhat more stability in what's going on, to where maybe it'll just slow down and kind of plateau for a while, right? So just from that perspective, it's just like, okay, we're not going to try to time it. And then, so if I am financially ready to buy a house, if I'm in an okay position to buy a house, then it's like basically granting permission to say, yes, go ahead and look for a house, right? And then thinking of how much can you afford. We gave some different rules of thumb of just like, okay, make sure you still have, that you have enough for the down payment, that you can afford the expenses of it, with your cash flow, while still not jeopardizing everything else that you prioritize, right? So it's like, if you're doing it and saying like, well, I just won't go on as many vacations, that's one thing, and that's perfectly okay. Like you could go over your over these rules of thumb, because it's just like, I value my home, like where I the location and the type of house that I live in. Like I value that more than than a lot of traveling to Europe and backpacking and all that other kind of stuff, right? But then also there's the normal priorities of retirement, and if you have kids, like how much do you want to fund kids' college and that kind of stuff. So it's just, a lot of these are so much of just questions of priority, right? Yeah. So yeah, I guess, yeah. Anything else to add on that?
I don't think so, actually. No, that was a great summary.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to the next part, which is the Reddit personal finance question of the week. So Reddit is our so it's our message board where people are pretty anonymous. There's a personal finance subreddit that I'll peruse every once in a while, and so I picked out a question from there that's very topical to what we're talking about, right? So this is what is it, ID Doc? So they said that they're thinking about buying a home that makes them spend 39% of their take-home income. Am I insane? Right? So just, I won't read through all of it, but just the highlights: 37, no kids, engaged, getting ready to get married, never own the house. So actually, to what we were just saying with the millennial generation, this is almost getting into Gen X, but we won't get into that debate of where millennials stop and start. And so yeah, it's just like done career stuff, got a PhD, and then now getting ready to buy, and it says our dream home just came on the market. So that's already adding a little bit of the emotional part of it, right? Like, this is our dream home, right? So it says the problem is that the market's totally nuts, like we've established, and the dream home is definitely at the top end of what I can afford, and that it might be a stretch now, but probably won't be in the near future. So predicting some future income. It says, while I know the prudent thing would be to get a starter home that sticks to the 28% rule, which we were just talking about. But I love this. But frankly, I could be dead pretty soon. And I've put off living well for so long that I kind of just want to do it. Right? So they keep going and give some stats of how much they make. But just getting to the end of, like, okay, is it a bad idea for this person to buy a home that it's like, it breaks one of these rules that we were talking about, right? Mm. So it's like, it's 39%. It's take-home pay, so that's a little bit different than what we were saying the 28% is. But it's like, am I about to ruin my life? So I guess kind of first at a glance, what do you think about this one, Keith?
So yeah, gosh, all sorts of thoughts. I read through this prior to this call. The whole dream home thing, that's a bit of a red flag to me, actually, from a financial perspective. It's obviously a good thing from a personal perspective, but that immediately opens the door to kind of be careful here. You don't want to overextend, as we talked about before. Right. And if you find the dream home, you're more likely to overextend. Also comes to mind that if it's your dream home, then decent chance it's going to be somebody else's dream home too. Maybe a lot of other people's dream home. And the bidding is going to be such that it's going to go way over even what they're thinking here. So don't know if that'll actually happen in this case, but that comes to mind here. Right. Also comes to mind that they might not be in as bad of shape as what they think, because it does make a difference as far as those rules of thumb on the 28%. Mm-hmm. You just said that's a gross income figure. Right. So 20% of your gross income, whereas they're saying here 39% of their take home pay.
Yeah.
So maybe once you do the math, they're within that 28% of gross, because take home is after taxes and all that, whereas gross, that means before taxes, it's like the top line. So maybe they're not as in bad shape. Maybe it's not as crazy or insane as they say as he or she thinks. I haven't run all the numbers. I'm not sure where like their income comes in versus the rules of thumb we did, but in the end, the rules of thumb are rules of thumb, and so really should be looking at their underlying cash flow and how expensive is their lifestyle otherwise beyond this potential home.
Right.
So those are some of the things that come to mind for me immediately. How about you?
Yeah, and those are all. I was kind of the same way with that. Like maybe you're not that far off. And actually, I have popped this on here. So if this is an understatement, not having kids changes everything.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep. So, but then also kind of with the higher income, right? So from that perspective, there might be more wiggle room, because as a percentage, like if that much is your house, then you might have a smaller percentage than the kind of average middle income family for other living expenses and things like that. But if you have a higher income, and I think this one there combined is right around 300,000, right? So I mean it's they're definitely a higher income couple, right? And so from that perspective, that's like your food's not going to be that much more expensive, right? And you're not going to be eating that much more food unless you're just also dining out at Michelin restaurants. So so again, and I think just to kind of tie it up with that, it's just like these are rules of thumb. But if you run your personal numbers and like you think that you can do it, and it fits to all these other things, other considerations that we talked about, then it's like yeah, I think it's okay to do that, right?
Yeah.
So
agree.
But so I guess that's and I like your point on the emotional part of it, and like that's definitely that's huge with houses. I mean, people don't get emotional about their investments nearly as much as their house, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. And in the end, you got to be somewhat emotional, right? Because you don't want to buy some place that you hate either. Right. So you really want to love the place where you're going to live, ideally. So, I get it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just a bit of a red flag. Be careful with it.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yep. Okay. Cool. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on and helping me work through this. So I guess maybe give a little bit of opportunity. So if people would want to reach out to you, where can they find you? How can they get in touch with Keith?
Great. Yeah. And thank you for the invite to be a part of this. I've had a great time. To get in touch with me, probably the best thing is you could either go to my website, which is spencerfinancialplanning.com. So that's nice and simple, spencerfinancialplanning.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You could search for Spencer Financial Planning or Keith Spencer, and you should be able to catch me in one of those places.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I'll put all that stuff in the notes on the video too.
Great.
So, all right, cool. Well, hey, Keith, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. It was a good time. And for everybody else, I hope you get something out of it too, and we will talk soon. All right.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks.